Hi everyone, it's Marissa here from Rise High. You have tuned in for a Facebook Live this month, and I'm joined with someone very special today, Mr. Peter Kalitsis, who is the Program Director of the Master of Property course at the University of Adelaide, commonly known as the Property Professor.
Thank you, Marissa.
Peter. Also runs a podcast called The Property Planner, Buyer and Professor, and is also an author and a very well-respected property researcher throughout Australia, very widely known, and we're very, very privileged to have him here with us today, talking all things property.
Thank you, Marissa.
Thanks for joining us, Peter. How have you been?
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, very good at this time of year because there's no teaching. Unfortunately, there's lots of marking, but we'll have a break soon before the next semester starts.
Yeah, well, I was really keen to get you in because obviously there's been so much craziness over the last 12 months with everything that's been happening with COVID, and obviously there's been, now we're starting to see rates rise, and they're starting to rise quite aggressively at the moment, and we're expecting that will continue. So obviously the question on many of our clients' mind, many of our community, is what's happening with property prices and what will happen with property prices. And who better to talk to about that than you? So what are you sort of seeing at the moment with property values? What's happening out there in the market?
So the market is certainly slowing from last year, and the growth that we had last year was terrific, but it's unsustainable. Like on average, I think the nation did over 20%.
Yeah,
well, you can't keep doing
amazing.
20% year on year.
Yeah.
So unfortunately for Sydney and Melbourne, their property prices are actually dropping. Sydney, Adelaide and Brisbane are the two top performers, still increasing at a slower rate than last year.
Yeah.
But my prediction is that by the end of the year, both Adelaide and Brisbane will probably do 20% again.
Again?
Yes.
Wow.
It's a bit
20% again. That would be so good.
It'd be like 2001, 2 and 3. They were some very good years.
Yeah.
And Adelaide and Brisbane are going to do the same again.
So you reckon there's another 20%er in us?
Well, Adelaide has already done 11%.
Yeah.
Possibly 12%. So we've only got another 8 or 9% to go before the end of the year. Look, if we don't get to 20, we'll get very close to 20.
Yeah.
Certainly above 15.
And Adelaide's really been leading the way.
And I think this year
of COVID.
This year, probably the first time ever since ABS started taking records, that Adelaide will be the best performing capital city in a calendar year.
And what do you think has caused that? What's been driving that growth in Adelaide compared to the other capital cities during this time?
So often when property prices go up around the nation, investors and even those people looking to relocate go to cheaper locations. Yeah. And Adelaide is cheaper than many other locations. Some people look for regional areas. But the other thing that's happened during COVID, and one of my kids is a classic example, where working from home is a big thing, but you don't have to live in the same city that you work. So one of my children, their boss and their work group is in Canberra, but they work from Adelaide.
And so they've moved back to Adelaide? Yeah. Because I know that, during this period, it actually did wonders for our net migration, didn't it?
It did.
We actually had people moving back to Adelaide. The other thing that I've heard of as well, and I wondered if you've sort of seen this as well, is that many, a lot of the recruitment agents that specialise in executive recruitment are finding that many people from interstate are actually interested in relocating to Adelaide and interested in, coming back home or just having a life change, a bit of a slower pace, somewhere that they can have a big backyard, bigger houses, more affordable.
For the same money. Like the Melbourne and Sydney dollars are going to do much better for you in Adelaide.
Yeah.
So far as the size of the house is concerned, the size of the land and the location. You're going to get much closer to the city. Yeah. Or you're going to get much closer to the sea.
Better, I think, and that's probably been a trend through, as a result of COVID, is that people are prioritising lifestyle.
They are.
And they're making the choice to have that lifestyle. I think the other driver for me has been, the rental returns. It's still hard to find any other capital city in the country that has the rental returns that Adelaide has.
So rents have gone up significantly, but Adelaide seems to have a real undersupply, and that started, this is my opinion, back in 2017 when APRA made it harder for investors to borrow money because they needed double the deposit of owner-occupiers, and then investors needed to pay a higher interest rate than owner-occupiers. You look at the graphs, and around February, March 2017, virtually every capital city, the vacancy rate started to drop. So the rental scene that you are seeing now has been 5 years in the making.
Yes.
And it's not going to change overnight, because you're going to need to have more investment properties for people to move into.
Yeah.
And you can't click your fingers and get more investment properties. And with the shortage of building materials and the shortage of labour, it's going to take even longer to bring on new investment properties. It's a big problem,
isn't it, for housing affordability for tenants? Because, you know, given what you've just said, are you expecting that the rentals will just keep increasing?
Yeah.
So
rents will continue to increase.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they will continue to increase at the same rate as they are now, but they will certainly continue to increase, because price is all about demand and supply.
Yeah.
Right? And yes, demand has been pretty good because people have been relocating from interstate, but when we fully open our international borders, where are all these people going to live?
That's right.
When international students get back to the level they were 2 or 3 years ago, where are they going to live? Yeah, they can live in purpose-built student accommodation, but many of them want to experience the Australian way of life, which is living in a house in suburbia.
In the suburbs, yeah.
Well, very hard to do.
It's going to be really interesting times ahead, I think. And I guess the other thing that's, you know, happening at the moment is that obviously Australia's experiencing high levels of inflation. The Reserve Bank are responding by increasing rates quite aggressively, and we're expecting that to continue. What impact do you think this aggressive rate rise will have on property values throughout Australia, and then if we bring it back to Adelaide as well, what are your thoughts around that?
So there is no doubt that interest rates increasing this time around is going to slow down the acceleration of property prices. But the property market is like a garden. You can't just say, if you add water, it'll grow.
Yes.
Because it depends on the sunlight. When it gets the sunlight, what's the soil like? Are there pests around? We could talk for a long time about what's happened to property prices when interest rates go up or down, and there's no correlation. Sometimes interest rates go up and property prices go up because there's something else driving it.
Yes.
And sometimes interest rates go down, and so do property prices. So that is certainly one factor this time, and mainly because some people haven't experienced an interest rate rise for 12 years. That's right.
So it's a whole generation of borrowers out there that have never experienced rates going up. So it's a little bit of a shock for them now.
It is. And one option is you can fix your rate.
Yes.
And look, for the first time in my investing life, I finally beat the banks and I fixed a rate at about 2.5%.
Well done.
For 3 years,
Good
but that's
work.
the first time ever. That's the first time ever.
Yeah, we normally say to our clients, fixed rates is not really about trying to beat the banks, because generally
you don't.
It's more about it's more of a risk management strategy, isn't it? It's more about knowing that you've got a certain portion of your debt that's fixed, and just coming up with that balance of risk that you're happy to take, and knowing that you can sleep at night, knowing that it's not all all going to move suddenly.
What people need to understand is generally interest rates rise because the economy is doing well.
Yeah.
Right? And inflation is going up.
Yeah.
But inflation is going up mainly because, as a result of COVID, two of the big drivers of inflation are car prices and energy prices.
Yep.
Now, the reason why car prices are so expensive is because factories overseas have been closed during COVID. And so, plus people have had more money in their pockets to spend, haven't been able to go overseas, so there's been more demand but low supply, so price goes up. And the other thing is the conflict in the Ukraine. A lot of energy or oil and gas comes from Russia, so there's an embargo on that. People still got to get their oil and gas from somewhere else. So you limit the supply of oil and gas, even if demand stays the same, price is going to go up. Yeah. So if we can keep those two things under control, then inflation will certainly won't be going up as fast as it is, and it'll get back to normal levels.
And we've sort of spoken about what we think over the next 12 months, but what do you sort of see as your prediction for sort of the next 5 to 10 years of property? I mean, in the past, we've sort of, there's sort of an underlying expectation that property values on average over the long term will sort of double every 10 years. Do you sort of see that, given that we have had such low interest rates for so long, do you see that growth level is sustainable moving forward? Or do you see that maybe we need to shift our expectations over what property will do over the long term? What are your views and gut feels about those areas?
Well, up until a few years before COVID, I said, well, property prices will not continue to double every 10 years because we have such low inflation and low interest rates.
Yes.
And then COVID came along, and then the average has gone back to once every 10 years. So I'm not a very good forecaster, but typically you would think that if inflation is low, subsequently interest rates are low, then prices won't be increasing as fast as they should.
Yes.
But prices also depend on people's incomes. If people's incomes grow like government wants and many economists want, people don't save the extra money that they earn. People spend it.
Yeah.
Well, that means they can spend more on property, which means it's going to force property prices up. Yeah. So, look, for me, it's a wait and see. There is no doubt that property prices will continue to go up as the Australian dream is still alive and strong. At what rate? Well, I think Australia is sitting pretty because we did very well during COVID.
Yeah.
So a lot of overseas migrants are looking at Australia even more so than they were beforehand.
Yes.
And a lot of international students are also looking at Australia even more so than they were before COVID because we cope with it so well. So COVID has had some benefits for us. And international students are a significant portion of the South Australian economy and overall the national economy.
So that might be something that actually supports further growth in our property market.
In particular, the rental market.
In particular, the rental market.
Because when overseas migrants come, they're not generally not allowed to buy.
No,
they have to rent.
But then maybe if they stay a few years, then potentially they can get permanent residency. Then they can look to buy. Shout out to Pat, Rucha, Adri, Mary, Joanna, Michael, Nola, Tom. Thanks for joining us, guys. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Peter today, please send them through. We're answering your questions live today. It's interesting how you said before, Peter, about when interest rates are a bit lower, you're expecting that sort of slower growth. And I had this sort of personal idea that maybe the average long-term property growth matches sort of what the average interest rate is. So if, I just sort of made it up and it worked for a while, where I was thinking, back when interest rates were about 7-8%, the average, because to double every 10 years, you sort of need that average growth rate of about 7-8%. And then I'm thinking, well, if interest rates stay really low at about, 2, 3, 4%, then you probably have to expect that that's going to be sort of the growth. But like you said now, we're back to, it's the world just keeps proving that formula works of property prices doubling every 10 years, doesn't it?
Typically, they won't go up 7% every year. They might only do 2 or 3% one year, but then they might do 20 or 30% another year to bring up the average.
And the thing is, the magic is having that crystal ball to know exactly what time to buy, time to get in.
That's why time in the market is so important. You don't know when the market is going to boom, but if you're in for the last 2 years, you would be laughing.
Yeah.
Your retirement's looking a lot better.
I loved our chat that we had last time you were here, and we did spend a lot of time talking about time in the market versus timing in terms of entering the market. I'd love to touch on that a bit more today if we can.
Yeah.
So can you just talk us through this concept for those viewers that haven't seen the last chat that we had about what that means and what your research has found in relation to that?
Sure. So what I did was looked at, if you just bought a property in a capital city and held it for 20 years, what would your price increase been? Yeah. And then I looked at, if you were smart enough to pick which capital cities were going to do best over a 5-year period, and you bought and sold, but bought in the next best performing capital city, sold, and then bought in the next best performing capital city. Yeah, I think there were over 500 different possible outcomes.
Yes.
Right? But there was only a very few that beat half of the capital cities where you just bought and hold. Because the biggest issue is the transaction costs, right? The buying of property,
stamp duty, the capital gains tax,
an extra 5%, capital gains tax, selling property, real estate agent, and then that assumes you knew which cities were going to do well.
Yeah,
which
most people don't.
No. And if you were a really bad predictor and bought in the worst performing capital cities each time, then you actually lost money.
Yes.
Now, most people are going to sit somewhere in the middle there, but the best way to make money in property is to buy and hold. So for all the young ones out there listening, you borrow as much as you can, buy as much as you can, as early as you can. That's the key. If that's the only thing you remember from today, remember that.
There's your nugget of gold right there.
There you go.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's definitely been my property investment strategy. So looks like it's definitely the right way to go. So yeah, I think the buy and hold strategy, there's a lot of people that we meet with, they're looking for a way to get rich quickly with property. And I like to say, well, I don't really see property as a get rich quick scheme. I sort of see it as a get rich slow strategy. Yeah. You need that time in to really sort of have that wealth. And we try and also express, the most important thing is to manage your cash flow so that you can hold the property for that 20-year period, so that you're not going to be forced to sell if interest rates go up, or those sorts of things happen.
Yeah. And look, for the older investors out there, I don't want you to feel like you're missing out. But if you've benefited from the last boom, go and speak to your financial planner and look at selling some and maybe putting some money into super, because that's certainly what I'm doing.
Yes.
Because as I get older, I don't need the capital growth as much as I need the cash flow, and I certainly don't want to be dealing with as many tenants as I have now as I'm older. But I'm not a financial planner, but you can put up to $330,000 into your super over a 3-year period, which may not sound a lot, but if you've got a partner, that's $330,000 for them as well.
Yes.
So that's $660,000. As it happens, $660,000 is what you need to live a moderate lifestyle.
Yes.
And that's not including the super that you've already accumulated or other property that you have. So that would be, I'm not here to give advice, but it's just my opinion.
And definitely, superannuation has that attractive tax structure
Certainly
attached
does.
to it.
Yeah.
One theme that we're seeing become quite popular over the last few years is actually contributing more to super and using super to buy property within the super. And now that the government has allowed you to actually borrow money through your super to have that extra leverage and allow your super to go further, we're actually seeing that a lot of people are interested in buying investment properties in their super, that they just do that buy and hold thing, as well as complementing any other investments they have in their super. So, and
if I'm going to buy one more property, it will be in my super fund, because the rent coming out will be tax free.
And also, if you ever sold the property, it's capital gains tax free. So how good is that?
So the estate will be very happy.
Yeah. We've had a question come through from Caleb. Do you think the recent proposal in New South Wales for the first home buyer, no stamp duty but annual fee instead, will be adopted in SA? And what impact will it have on prices coupled with the current interest rate rises? That's a great question, Caleb, because obviously that new stamp duty structure in New South Wales is something new and exciting. What are your thoughts around that, and what impact it might have on property values?
Yeah, so I did a little video on this a couple of years ago for PIPA, which is the Property Investment Professionals of Australia. So if you go to pipa.asn.au, I reckon it's a website, and you'll see a little video. Now, I don't say one's better than the other. I just say the advantages and the disadvantages of each.
Yeah.
But getting back to that New South Wales initiative, other states are looking at the same thing, mainly because when there's a property boom, state governments love it because there's plenty of money coming in through stamp duty.
Yes.
But when the market is not booming, they don't have as much money. So it's much easier for them to budget if they know that there is a relatively steady income coming in.
Yes.
I think that's a great initiative, and that's one thing that's going to act as a safety net for property prices in New South Wales.
Yes.
Because that will encourage first home buyers to come in and buy.
Yep.
Because as we were saying before, like with the new Labor government, they're bringing in a scheme where you may only need 2% deposit.
Yes.
Which is really good. But if you have to save another 5% in stamp duty, you're a long way away from buying a property. If you only need that 2%,
that's right.
Get in.
And really for most first home buyers, especially now with the property values having increased, having that initial deposit is their biggest struggle.
Yeah.
So I guess, from my perspective, I see that new initiative just gives people the opportunity that have the income to buy but don't necessarily have the deposit saved, that they can actually get into the market a bit earlier.
Yeah.
So you reckon that it might be adopted by the other states as well?
I think it will. There's a lot of talk about it. The states want some federal help. In what way, I'm not sure, but it's already happened in the ACT. That's been going for several years. And now, which is only a small place, but New South Wales is our biggest state, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah. But I am pretty sure that other states will go the same way. But for those that have been around long enough, you may remember that one of the benefits of the GST coming in was that state governments were supposed to get rid of stamp duty.
Yes.
Well, 22 years on, they never did. They never did.
Got a bit greedy, Peter, didn't they?
They certainly did.
And you said that it's been running in the ACT for a little while. Do you know of whether it had any impact on property values when it got implemented in the ACT?
It's being transitioned in over a 20 to 30 year period, so it's still too early to tell.
Okay.
But one would think that if New South Wales is going down that path, there must be some early good signs that it's working.
Yeah, so that will be really interesting, something to watch. Thanks for the question, Caleb, that's great. We've had another question come through from Sam. She asked, are there good buying opportunities at the moment?
Yeah, look, if you're going to buy and hold, right, and you're going to hold for 15 or 20 years or more, it doesn't matter whether you buy today or next year or the year after, because, especially in Adelaide, the property you want to buy today is not going to be cheaper next year.
Yes.
Right? It's dropped 1%, 2% in Sydney, but in Sydney in particular, property prices went up almost 30%. So if you drop 3%, you're still way out in front. So for me, the key to making money in property is you need to buy the right type of property in the right suburb. So, and I was speaking to quite a wealthy property investor yesterday, and he said he's been buying property. So, you must have found property at a good price. I said, no, mate, you can't find property at a good price, but because it seems expensive today, but it'll be cheap tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's right. Even when we look back at 2 short years, and I mean, I'm a big fan of buying character properties in the inner western suburbs of Adelaide. Yes. And you have a look at what you could have bought those properties for 2 years ago in Myland and Thebarton and Torrensville, and what they're selling for now. I mean, if you had a crystal ball, you'd be laughing.
They always say the best time to buy was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Very true.
So come and speak to your Rise High mortgage broker so we can help you out. Shout out to Carol, Jamie, Faraz, Leishi. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, send them through. Also got a question here from Tom. We've already answered that one. What can we expect over the next 6 to 12 months plus? 12 months plus, we've already answered that one. But this other question from Caleb came through. Where should investors be looking to buy and what should they be looking for?
Okay, so I'm a big fan of gentrification.
Yes.
So it's looking at areas that people didn't want to live in before, but mainly because of its position, its proximity to the city or its proximity to the sea, and very importantly, its high concentration of character properties. White collar professionals move in. They have more money, so they spend more money on buying property, renovating and renting. Yeah. So there are many opportunities in Adelaide if you're looking at following that gentrification cycle. So the inner west I mentioned.
Yes.
So my land is already really gentrified, but that's going through a second cycle of growth, mainly because of what's happening in the west end of the city, like the new Royal Adelaide Hospital. The 2 universities have built their health buildings there, and the new Women's and Children's Hospital is going to go there.
Yes.
So there's a lot of interest from medical professionals. Thebarton is in the early stages of gentrification. Torrensville is in the middle stages of gentrification. Have a look at Richmond.
Yep.
Richmond has more post-war homes than pre-war homes, but it's much more affordable than, say, Torrensville. And probably if your budget is around 700 or 800, because I only encourage people to buy houses. If you can't afford to buy a house, then wait.
So you mean, when you say that, you mean stay away from units and apartments?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. So have a look at the suburb of Kilkenny. Kilkenny is right next door to West Croydon. West Croydon is already very expensive. But parts of Kilkenny are very similar to West Croydon.
Yes.
And what you'll see is that ripple effect. Or if you've got a budget of only, say, 500, I'd be looking at houses down at Christie's Beach, Port Noarlunga South.
Okay, great. Great tips. We've had a question come through from Carol. Are there particular suburbs that you think might decrease in values with Adelaide's rate rises?
Yeah, so what I think, like one area, and maybe not whole suburbs, but certainly sectors of the market, is where people paid a fortune for their holiday homes. Because they didn't care they had plenty of money, they saved up plenty of money, interest rates were low. So if we're looking at South Australia, for example, they paid a fortune for properties on Kangaroo Island or down at Victor Harbour. And I'm talking Esplanade properties generally. Even Esplanade properties at Aldinga Beach, Sellex Beach, Port Wollonga. Yeah. Those properties you might find, if they were to sell them in 2 or 3 years' time, may not sell at the same price or more than what they paid for it. But generally your typical suburban houses, I should say rather than homes, will continue to improve. But typically what drops in value over time, especially the first few years, is apartments. Yeah. And that's going to be no different this time around.
Yeah. That sort of follows on to Adrian's question. He sent through a question about with property prices decreasing in Melbourne and Sydney, do you see that could potentially happen in Adelaide as well?
The rate of growth will drop in Adelaide, but like we had 23% last year. To go from 23% to -1, that's a 24% drop. That's and what's going to cause it?
Unlikely.
The main thing that would cause it would be high unemployment, because if you don't have a job, there is no way you're going to make your mortgage repayments. But we have the lowest unemployment on record.
Yes.
Now, the high inflation is going to impact some other areas of the economy. You may not go out to eat as often, or you may hold off buying the new car or going overseas. But the last thing you're going to do is stop paying your mortgage, because that's got big consequences. And the main reason you're going to stop paying your mortgage is because you lost your job. Yeah. Well, at the moment, it's almost like you can leave one job today and you can go to a new job tomorrow. I mean, it's not as good as that. But I remember when my father first came over from Greece, he would leave a job in the morning, he'd have another one in the afternoon. Yeah. And this time around, within a week, you're going to find one. Yeah. And there are so many recruiters who are headhunting, and so many firms that are willing to pay money on top. Yeah. You know, we'll increase your salary, but here we'll give you an extra 20 or 30,000 just to come over. Yeah. That's unheard of. Yeah. Especially in the property field.
It's probably unsustainable in a way as well. So eventually it will come down. But yeah, definitely lots of interesting things to watch for, and there's a lot of unknowns happening overseas. But I think from what I'm hearing from you today, it reflects sort of what I thought as well would happen, is that hopefully property prices will continue to grow in Adelaide in the short term and then remain relatively stable. Yeah,
and then we'll go back to normal. You know, we do 2 or 3 or 4% for most years, and then we'll do 20 or 30% a couple of years, bring back that average again.
And then we celebrate during those years, and you just have to hope that you get in at the right time. But like Peter said, it's the time in the market rather than the timing. And Peter's actually provide us with a really great handout, which we're going to provide in the link in the blog, in our blog post, which actually shows the property growth or decline in values every year from 1987 to 2021, which is just a really amazing resource. And I think the great thing that it shows is that every suburb has its ups and downs.
Yeah. So and when they have their downs, they only have their downs by single digits. Yes. But when they have their ups, they have them in double digits.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing that it reflects for me is that when you look at all of the different capital cities over time, over the long term, they really just sort of average themselves out, don't they? Yeah. You know?
And you don't know when that boom is coming, like you said before.
That's right.
You're much better off just buying, holding, knowing that, you know, in 5, 10 or 15 years' time, your property is going to be worth much more in value than it is today. But you just don't know whether it's 5, 10 or 15 years.
So you've heard it here. Your takeaway for today is buy something that you can afford to hold. Manage your cash flow. Make sure you can afford to hold it for the long term, and you will be fine. It's the guaranteed get rich slow strategy.
Certainly is.
Well, Peter, it's been wonderful having you here today. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your input. I'm sure that our community's really appreciated having you here. And thank you once again. We hope to see you again next time.
Thank you, Marissa. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.